Hello, and thanks for joining us as we continue our coverage of the 2024 election, bringing you the candidates that are on the ballot to talk about the issues that are important to you. And joining us today is current Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, who will be running as a Republican for West Virginia governor. Thank you for joining us and giving us your time today, sir. Obviously, we're taping this on a Thursday morning. Tonight is the debate up in Morgantown, where some of the other Republicans on the ballot will be discussing the issues. The first question that I have for you is a question that a lot of people probably want answered. Why are you not part of that debate tonight?
Well, first of all, Rick, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today and to give me the opportunity to talk about some of the reasons why I'm running for governor. I can say with respect to the debate, I've been out in front challenging the other candidates to debate. In fact, I asked them to agree to a series of 3 debates, but this media entity decided that it wanted to set a particular debate with a specific time in a specific city, and they make up all the rules. That's just not the way it should be. I think this needs to be organized. You need to actually involve a lot of people from across the state. The filing deadline hasn't even happened yet. That'll be the end of January. I expect that there may be people that drop out between now and the filing deadline, and there may be people that come in. Let's do a series of debates. Let's give the candidates some input. Don't just let the media elites and the political elites make all the decision. I stand firm. I want to weigh in. We're reasonable. We work with people, but I'm never going to just take the directive of the media about all the rules and what they say has to happen to be on a public forum.
Now, this is no surprise or secret. It's a Metro News debate held up in Morgantown. Yeah. Specifically, what was it that caused your apprehension to be like, well, I don't like this specific rule or format? Or was there anything that?
Well,
that really
I think the first piece is that we wanted to change the date, and we were not interested in that particular date.
Is it too early for you?
Yeah, I think that we wanted to do it after the filing deadline, right? I think most people know that so much can change. There was actually a major candidate, J.B. McCuskey, who was running for governor. He stepped away to run for attorney general, right. And I think there may be some additional people that step up. There are also people that are being excluded from the debate because they just decided who would participate. They decided the date. I think very reasonably said, hey, I'm willing to work with you. Let's be part of the broader 3 debates that I challenged others to have. But they just had no interest, and they wanted to have their rules. They directed all the time. I don't work that way. When I'm governor of the state of West Virginia, I'm going to listen. I'm going to learn, but we're also going to act based on principle and do the right thing to make sure that West Virginia voices are heard, not just that of the media.
Well, we're going to take a deep dive into a lot of those issues, and I will have some very specific questions for you. But first off, just to give you a general chance to explain to the people of West Virginia why you believe that you would be the right choice.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here because I think if voters looked at my record, they'll know I'm the only proven conservative with a record of getting really big things done for our state. When it comes to protecting jobs from the onslaught coming from Washington, D.C., that famous West Virginia EPA case, when it comes to helping our farmers, our contractors, those in our energy industry with the Waters United States rule case, when it comes to probably having the single best record in West Virginia, taking on the drug epidemic, we've been very forceful. We did the things we knew that were right to win, to get the highest rated settlements in the country. And those experiences have prepared me to take on the new challenges out there to improve the standard of living for West Virginians, to drive educational attainment higher and higher, to grow workforce participation, because that's how we're going to have to compete better with the other states we touch, and someone who clearly has a record of standing up to the political and media elites and a lot of this woke culture that tries to invade West Virginia.
Now, you made a name for yourself nationally as a conservative back in 2014 by going after the Obama administration with a couple of lawsuits. First off, the lawsuit against the ACA, which was eventually dismissed, but then after that, against what you considered overreach by the EPA, which resulted in a historic stay in 2016 at the Supreme Court level. That obviously put you in good graces with the Conservative Party. It also put a target on your back from environmental groups.
Sure.
And that brings me full circle to what's happening now. Earlier this week, a story from Mike Toney, one of our great journalists at the Gazette-Mail, about a settlement from Ohio, $110 million settlement with Chemours, which was they were found liable for releasing PFAS into the waterways. And we can go down that deep dive here in West Virginia that recently they went through 27 water systems, found 19 contained
Yeah.
levels of PFAS that were at least over one metric that would
Right.
be determined to be dangerous.
Sure.
And I do have a question here. I'm just
Yeah,
kind of
no,
going
of
over
course.
background here. A lot of neighboring, Kentucky has sued Chemours. Our other neighboring states,
Yeah.
Pennsylvania and Maryland, have sued chemical companies.
Yeah.
So far, West Virginia has not filed any
Yeah.
lawsuits. And I know that you're limited in what you can say about potential
Absolutely.
pending litigation, but this is your chance to maybe talk about,
course.
because you can understand, I'm sure, that there are people that would say, okay, well, this is a guy, Chemours contributed to your campaign. It was nominal, less than $3,000 back in 2020, but there could be a perceived conflict of interest here, and all these other states are doing this. Why hasn't West Virginia so far done this?
Let me reassure the public. First of all, we always take action in the best interest of the public. That's important. The same is obviously going to happen here. Our states are very different in terms of how they're structured, the authorities of the Attorney General in each of the state. But we are absolutely on top of this. We have been for a long time. And the object is to get it right, to protect the interest of West Virginians. So we're going to make sure that we're very diligent through this process, and people can have confidence that the right thing will happen for West Virginia. Very similar to what you saw for the drug epidemic, where a lot of people were very critical early on, and we proved all of our critics wrong by getting the #1 per capita settlements in the country. West Virginia is absolutely all over this issue, and we've been interacting for a long period of time. We're going to keep focusing on this. I have some limits in terms of what I can talk about, but I think that West Virginians know that they're going to get the best interests put forth by the AG's office. Also, a little bit different, there have been some other settlements in West Virginia that didn't occur in the states prior, going back to 2004.
Right.
There's been a national settlement. So when you're trying to do this right, you want to put all that together to maximize the value for West Virginia, to make sure that there's a little bit more certainty with these forever chemicals, because that could be very serious for folks. And I want to make sure that we're looking out for the public interest and the public health of our citizens.
But do you understand the take that, well, is he looking out for the public health?
Of course,
Is he
yeah.
looking out for the people that have had these cancer-causing chemicals in their waterways? It almost seems like by not having any kind of litigation at all that you might be looking out for the chemical companies instead.
No, I think people who know me know that I always put the best interest of West Virginians first. That always is the case. And in fact, we've been working on these issues. And once again, sometimes when you're the Attorney General and you're supposed to keep conferences and you're doing investigations, you're reviewing, you can't talk about everything at the same time. But I will tell you that we will protect West Virginians. And it's not just for the quick buck. It's to make sure that there are long-term issues that get addressed. That's important because there's still a lot of uncertainty with respect to these forever chemicals. And when West Virginia is engaged, it has to get it right. That's my pledge to the people of the state, and we've backed it up every single time.
Now, you talked a little bit about other issues that you've worked on, and the opioid settlement
Yeah.
that actually led to some criticism from some conservative groups and some other members. The CALA, Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse, their spokesman, Greg Thomas, who's a big conservative in the state, he said that the $140 million that went to attorney's fees was exorbitant.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you did bring in a lot of money for the state, but a lot of that money is going to attorneys as well. So you're getting criticism from both sides on that.
Usually when you get it right, you're going to get attacked by someone, right? And I would say this, West Virginia, you could look at the facts. What my office controlled, not only do we get the #1 per capita settlements in the country, but the state-based legal services are actually the lowest in the country. So we actually got the most amount of money for the lowest fees. That's a big win. So I think the misnomer that some of these people out there didn't realize is that West Virginia negotiated a great deal as a state. But counties and cities operate under different rules. And so the counties and cities ended up wanting to pay a lot more for legal services than the state did. I think eventually that should change, but I can only control what's in the state office. And I would say this, when you could negotiate the single lowest legal fees in the country for a state and get the best possible results, working collaboratively with the counties and cities,
So you don't think
that's
you
a
left-
really good deal.
You don't think you left any money on the table there?
Well, no, we didn't leave any money on the table. I obviously was critical of the overall amount of legal fees because I want to make sure that the dollars are focused on those who need it the most, the victims of the drug epidemic, and make sure that there's more money in the targeted plan to help fight this terrible plague. This has been a top priority for me. I think we've done some pretty incredible things. There's a new structure that's coming together that for the first time ever is going to have resources and a plan to go after it. Sure, I would have liked to have a lot more money that went to the counties and cities' lawyers. I stood up for that. I submitted briefs on that. But for what I control, we were the best in the country. And we'll keep pushing and work with the legislature to do even better for the future for those counties and cities.
Now, an offshoot of that was the creation of the West Virginia First Foundation,
Absolutely.
which will be in charge of allocating this money, making sure it's going to the right spots. There's been some talk that there are people who want a little bit more transparency in how this board has come together. And I know you can't speak on who's going to lead it. That'll come at a later time. But what can you talk about right now in terms of that board and some of those transparency issues where people want this out in the open so that they know exactly what's happening here?
Well, look, I think one of the things that I stood for in the drafting of the West Virginia First Memorandum of Understanding, which was really the genesis of how the foundation came into place, is that we need there to be transparency in terms of the total dollars that are being spent, and I think that people should be part of the process. So I think it's critical that people are going to get full access to these records to know all the dollars that are being spent. They're going to know the grant process. They're going to be able to participate. That's part of the reason, Rick, that we wanted to have these expert advisory panels as well. And in fact, there's no pre-requirement. Any citizen can participate in them. I think what's happening now is that the board has finally been constituted. It's come together. I know they want to have a lot of transparency around it. I want to have a lot of transparency around it. I think that's going to come, but it's a new entity and it's going to take a little bit of time because they had to open up their bank account. They had to engage in the transfer. They're considering issues relating to the next executive director. Right. All of that, I think people are going to be very happy with what they see. And I think the public deserves to know where the dollars are getting spent.
Now, another issue that has kind of bled over into the AG's office as well is what's happening in our state jails. I don't think there's anyone out there who would disagree that something needs to be done, that whatever the problem is, there is a problem and we need to fix it. Recently, one of your assistants was fired because of all that's going on right now, and then some lawsuits have been settled. If your role becomes governor instead of attorney general, what can you do to continue this process of making sure that everything that's going on with these what are alleged to be unsafe conditions happening in our jail system gets fixed properly?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And while there are some limitations given the litigation ongoing, I think that all West Virginians should come to expect that when precious taxpayer dollars are used to fund state agencies or our judicial system or our prison system, that things are operating at the highest possible level. Rick, I think everyone knows that there's been a huge shortage of people and they had a really difficult time recruiting. In fact, one of the examples was that one of the jails, I think it was Eastern Regional Jail, had such a high rate where they didn't have the ability to physically do all the things that were needed. I think that needs to be a broader fix in West Virginia because I look at the challenges we have from a state workforce perspective, and there's some similarities both in terms of the private sector challenges we face and government, and you have to compete with all the states that you touch. You have to do it from an economic perspective, on taxation, on regulations, on education. You also have to do it with the public sector as well. One of the things, Rick, that I was most frustrated on is that there were a lot of people, first responders, law enforcement community. You'd attract these really good people, and then they may get a call from Ohio or another state. They're getting paid $25,000 more. When you can't compete with the other states that you touch, that's a real problem. I think that's a big part of it. But separately, there has to be an expectation about how everything's being handled and that there's competence running these organizations, and there's going to be accountability at the end of the process. So as governor, people could know we have the depth of experience to know not only how to run the railroad, but to be very successful in addressing this. But there's a broader issue at stake that West Virginia needs to compete and defeat a lot of the states that we touch economically, on taxes, but also ensuring we're going to have the best workforce in the country.
And this is one of those issues that kind of, it transcends judicial, legislative, and executive branches. So do you think that your background as a lawyer can give you an advantage should you go to the executive branch?
I think so. In fact, one of the differences between myself and all the other candidates is I'm the only one with the proven record of getting big things done, and we know what to do on day one. I would argue that a lot of my opponents, they're going to take 2 years to learn where the bathroom is located in the Capitol because they don't have that type of experience. We need someone with the threats that are upon us from D.C., from Charleston, some of the issues you've mentioned, who knows what he's doing on day one, who has a record of getting big things done, and is not going to be afraid to take on the challenges. Look, I'm before you today because I'm not afraid to take on the tough challenges with a media outlet that hasn't always been an ally of mine. I'm a believer that the next governor has to take these tough challenges and has to address them. I'm not looking to shy away from them.
You said, you need someone from here. A lot of people would say, well, Patrick Morrisey isn't from West Virginia. He's not a West Virginian. As you know, you've come to learn, in West Virginia, West Virginians have a habit of stepping up when they need to and taking care of their own. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, once a mountaineer, always a mountaineer, with West Virginia University fandom. But that can transcend into politics as well. And you've heard the criticisms, you've heard the term carpetbagger thrown out there. What we haven't heard from a lot is, in your own words, your journey to West Virginia. Obviously born in Brooklyn, raised in Jersey. Talk a little bit about that process of getting you from the East Coast to West Virginia and why you do consider yourself a West Virginian.
Yeah, no, I'm really appreciative that folks ask, because you see all these nonsense ads over the years, and people may not realize that I moved to West Virginia in 2006, and for 15 years before that, I actually used to do a lot of hiking on the Appalachian Trail. I'd get the kayak in the Shenandoah River. I used to go to Harper's Ferry, which has a lot of history in the Civil War. It flipped back and forth 7 times. So I used to go there because I really love the history of the area, and I'm an old history buff. So for many years, I used to visit the Eastern Panhandle, and then I'd never owned a house in my life. I didn't grow up with any money, but I did grow up with the right values instilled in me. My dad worked for U.S. Steel, and we saw the ups and downs of the steel industry. My mom was a VA nurse. We didn't have much money. I think I remember at age 18, I'd been in a total of 3 states, and one of them was for a couple hours. We just didn't have the resources to compete. So I remember that when I started to look for a place to live, and I used to spend all this time in West Virginia, I said, well, this is a beautiful area. The people are incredible. And so I decided to buy a house in West Virginia long before I ever thought of running for office. To be honest, it was the last thing on my mind.
Where was that house?
That's in Shenandoah in Harper's Ferry.
So basically a D.C. suburb.
Well, look, I think that there are so many.
I'm just being honest.
Look, I think there's so many people in the Eastern Panhandle very proud of the heritage, and I think everyone knows there's one candidate in this race who's not only been to every 55 counties, but has held public town calls and has been everywhere across the state, because I love the people of Southern West Virginia. Part of the reason why I think I resonate in Southern West Virginia, in Charleston and other parts of the state, is people know, look, my dad worked for U.S. Steel. And so he did a lot of the accounts receivable for them, but he lost his job a couple times during the ups and downs. People in the coal industry, the steel industry know about that. I can relate to the values. I have more West Virginia values than all the other candidates, and I think people get that. It's what you stand for. It's your actions of what you do. And when you take on the tough fights, and I did, against Obama and Biden, and we've won. We protected our coal jobs, and we've won big issues and fights for West Virginia. I love our state with every fiber in my being. And so I wasn't born here, but I chose to move here, and I love it. And I've been here for a long time, and I wouldn't take anything back.
You talk about resonating. A lot of that has to do with connecting to the people.
Sure.
And that brings me to my next point. The role of governor, a bit different than the role of attorney general.
Sure.
And a lot of these polls that you see, one of the questions that will get asked is how likable is the candidate. We saw that with the man in office right now, Jim Justice. His first term was a bit of a roller coaster. What started to really galvanize his favorability numbers and put them on a rocket course up was the way he handled COVID in many people's eyes.
Sure.
When he was out there every day originally, and then every week talking about guiding us through that problem and that crisis. Favorability matters, whether we want it to or not. Not everyone is a policy wonk. And sometimes, especially in the role of governor, where you're also the face of the state.
Sure, of course.
People want to like you.
Yeah.
Your numbers historically have probably not been where you would want them to be on that issue. That brings me to my question. Have you ever had that kind of introspective moment where you look yourself in the mirror and say, what can I, Patrick Morrisey, do to get people to like me?
Well, I think that people know that there's a different role between the Attorney General and Governor, and people know me very well, and they know the fact that if you look at the polling numbers in this race, I think we're ahead, whether it's 10 or 12 or 15 points, I don't know, but people know that I love the state and that I care very much about helping West Virginia move to the next level, and people know that I relate. Anytime you go to the the folks that are in McDowell County, or you go into Raleigh County, we get these gatherings together. People know that I can feel their pain and be able to help address some of the issues far better than a lot of these other guys. Quite frankly, I'm running against a lot of folks who are the named politicians. Every one of the major opponents out there is from the big political family. I'm the guy from the family that you don't ever hear about. And we worked hard to make ends meet. I remember being young, delivering newspapers and working and mowing lawns and doing all the hard labor work. I'm not the guy that's been gifted anything. I think when people know that, they react very well. And in fact, in this race, part of the reason that we're up by so much, as you know, in the polls, is because people say, hey, that guy has a real life story, that whatever you think about Morrisey, he's authentic, he gets the job done, and that's what we'll do as governor. We need someone who's going to always look out and fight for West Virginia. We need a conservative. And I think someone also can work with President Trump. I was the first person to endorse President Trump in this primary, and it took someone else 161 days later and to have a poll to know what to do. What you see is what you get. And I think that there are a lot of great things we're doing. And I think West Virginia is going to be able to achieve so much to be that shining state in the mountains when I'm governor.
A couple things to unpack there. First off, polls in this day and age sometimes can be a tricky thing. You get what you pay for, a lot of people would say. So as a comprehensive look, they might start to offer a snapshot. But when you just take one poll, you kind of have to look into who's commissioning that poll, because a lot of times, like I said, you get what you pay for. Secondly, you mentioned Trump again. I assume that that's who your vote will go to in next year's presidential election?
It is. In fact, I was the first and the only candidate for a long time to get out in front and endorse President Trump. Look, I'm a believer that he's the only one who's going to be able to stop that D.C. swamp. And many people watching know that I took on the D.C. swamp and I've won repeatedly against them. And they're coming for West Virginia jobs. Just look at the issue of electric vehicles as one specific example. The Biden administration wants to put 70% of Americans in electric vehicles by 2030, mandatory EVs. They're trying to dramatically increase the demand for electricity while they're trying to eliminate the supply. Coal-fired power plants, natural gas. There's no one else running who's going to have any clue about what to do to push back against that. We need someone with that experience. And also, I think someone who could work effectively with President Trump. I think he's going to win. I'm excited about that. I got out in front first, so I've always been a big supporter of President Trump. These other guys have to take polls to figure out where they are. I don't need to do that.
I want to get into a cold question here in a second, but hypothetically, if President Trump wasn't on the ballot, who would your vote go to? Have you thought about that yet?
You know, I think President Trump is going to be on the ballot. In fact, we're working to keep him on the ballot here in West Virginia, and we're helping out in some other places as well, because I think that's right. You shouldn't deprive a citizen the right to run for president. So I'm going to focus my energy on President Trump. I think there are a lot of other good candidates running. The fact is that I think everyone has something good to offer, just like in this race, right? I don't know how many of the folks will stay in the race through the filing deadline, but they're good people. You're not going to hear me have criticisms on a personal level for them. But I'm with President Trump, and West Virginia voters can expect that. Everyone else, you may have to watch with the political winds.
You have gone on the record as saying that you believe that what's happening right now in the court system is a political prosecution
absolutely.
Of the president. As your role of Attorney General, where you want to let the facts play out first before making those types of decisions, do you see that as any kind of conflict to go on the record as saying that before everything's played out?
Look, I think we know a lot, because you could go from the source of how a lot of these allegations came in. And when you see things that are wildly political in nature, that's a big problem. So if you start with a bad premise, you're usually going to get with a bad result. Bad premise, bad process, bad result.
The old I think that's what garbage in, garbage out from.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. And you see with Trump, I mean, they had some of the most ridiculous allegations against them that they wouldn't pursue against anyone. That's why I stood up and said no.
Is that kind of mind reading, though? Do you know for sure that they wouldn't pursue that against anybody else, and that it's specifically?
Well, they haven't pursued it against anyone else, and I think they're certainly going after this president. And let me say, this president has been better for West Virginia than any other president that we've seen. That's why I've been so positive about him. I worked with President Trump as the Attorney General, and obviously when I ran a couple years back for another office, And we had a chance to get to know each other. I will tell you, he loves the state of West Virginia passionately. And I think it's great because we're going to have a good working relationship. And that's going to be important for someone to be able to work with the next president, because West Virginia is in the crosshairs. And I want to make sure that I could work with President Trump. And if for some reason we're not dealing with that, you need someone who's going to just be really tough, preventing Washington from running roughshod over our state. That's my record. No one else is going to be able to do that.
I want to talk about coal a little bit, because even though the coal industry is on the decline, it's still important in the state. And for politicians, it's still important to get favor out of the coal industry. But it's the coal miners who actually vote.
Sure.
There was a recent law passed that limits the liability and limits the amount that coal miners can receive in litigation over unsafe work conditions, injuries on the job. Where do you stand on that piece of legislation in terms of coal miners versus the coal industry and the coal leaders?
Look, I've actually have a record of standing up for the coal miners. That's been my focus. I am endorsed by the West Virginia Coal Association as well. I think we enjoy a lot of support from coal companies and the miners. In fact, right now we're still processing. I'm now in my 11th year as Attorney General, and we're processing a case about dust mask that the coal miners use that deals with 3M and a couple other companies. And I'm standing up for the miners because I think that they were hurt in that process. So I have a record of standing for the miners and stepping up. And I'd be open to looking at every single issue that goes through. I will tell you this, whenever the legislature is pushing bills through, you're going to see a unique approach from me. I'm going to try to bring them in very early in the process to work to get a common agenda about what works for the House, what works for the Senate, what works for the governor and for the people of our state. And that's how we're going to move things forward. And so I stand with the coal miners, and I'd be happy to take a closer look at some of those new provisions, because we need to make sure we stand up for the people that have stood up for coal.
This current political climate, it almost seems like everyone's in a race to see how far to the fringes they can get. It's almost like they've left the middleman out. Like 80% of America still lives, I think, in that range of being able to at least look across the aisle and see what's happening. But politics these days seems to be yelling to the masses on the far fringes. Do you think that that's good overall for what America is or what needs to be? Or, I mean, it seems like it's the other side that's divisive. You hear that from everyone.
Yeah.
But at some point, it seems like everybody's being divisive these days.
I think you should be civil with people and treat people with respect. I mean, I'm in here today, and I'm in here, quite frankly, with different folks, a company owned by someone who I ran against a number of years ago. I think that you should be able to talk to people, even if you disagree with them. And that's something that's been lost a little bit. I have that ability to do that, and that's been the way I've worked my entire life. And one of the things that I'm going to posit in this campaign, a big part of the rationale behind my candidacy, is that we're going to compete aggressively in the arena, but we're going to try to get along. We're going to have that civility. And Rick, when I talk about competing in the arena, I really am talking about competing with all the states that we touch. One of the centerpieces of what I'm trying to get done from an economic perspective, a regulatory perspective, an educational perspective, workforce, is to look at every one of the policies of all the states that we touch. You look at Virginia, look at Maryland, look at Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, and then set up the West Virginia policy. And then we want to defeat those states. But it's going to be a friendly competition. I'm going to try to work with our governors and our neighboring states so we can have regional approaches. We have a chance with Marcellus and Utica Shale to do incredibly well. And West Virginia, I would argue, is better positioned than any state post-COVID because people want to live in a state that's free and live in a state that's just beautiful the way we are. And I feel that we can compete and defeat all the states that we touch. Let's make it like the backyard brawl. Let's beat all the states that we touch and let's win. And that's going to be my approach as governor.
Appealing to WVU fans now.
Well, and we love Marshall too. I'll tell you what,
go.
the soccer teams for both WVU and Marshall have been off the charts, and I love it. So I'm excited to get to work as the next governor.
And one of the buzzwords around here, and it has been for a generation, is diversifying the economy. It sounds great, but when you peel away the layers of the onion, it's like, well, what is that, and how do you do it responsibly and efficiently? As Attorney General, you're more on the litigation side of things. As Governor, you would be the Chief Executive, so you'd be executing these plans. What is your vision for diversifying the economy? What is your vision for getting West Virginia out of having to be so reliant on fossil fuels? We saw what happened with coal. Same thing could happen with natural gas. How do we make sure that we can retain talent here, because brain drain's a very real thing in the state, and offer them other solutions so that we can move forward and get out of having all of our eggs in one basket?
Look, I think it's a great question, and West Virginia does need to attract additional business here. We've seen some starts, some improvement in recent years, but I think we could move faster. One of the ways you move faster is you set up this competition with all the states that we touch. And I think, for instance, getting rid of the state income tax would be very valuable, because we want to attract people in all different types of businesses. If you look at our old tax code and the way our structure was put in place, it was designed for a mining and an agrarian economy from a long, long time ago, a century ago. We can do a lot better than that, because we want to keep the strength of mining. We want to make sure we protect our farmers, but we want to attract a lot of new people. There are a lot of new remote jobs, opportunities, satellite positions. So I think if we're able to analyze the tax differences between our state and all the ones that we touch, we can start winning regionally. We have to be very aggressive in reducing the regulatory burdens. And I think also, Rick, one of the things that people care most about to improve our state is you need the best education possible, educational attainment. If you're a young family with a couple kids, before you move to a state, you're going to be darn sure that you have the right school system, where you have the right educational opportunities. When I'm the next governor, I'm going to go a lot further in terms of our options for money following the child, empowering kids and parents, and having charter school options. I think that's really important. And I think we can get that diversity by looking at the tax code, by looking at education, by really going after these unneeded regulations. And that's going to be a big difference between my approach as governor and all my competitors.
Again, you said a lot there, so we'll unpack it one thing at a time.
Yeah.
We'll move backwards. The last thing you talked about was education. Obviously, there's been a big push for charter schools from the Republican Party, push back from education unions and public schools. You said the money follows the child. The theory behind that is you have a certain amount of money that every child would need, and then if the child goes to a charter school, that should be the money that they need over there. The public school system says, okay, that's that's fuzzy math though, because if you're taking all this money away from public schools, regardless of how many kids are here or there, you're going to hemorrhage our funding, and we'll collapse and crumble. Is there a balance here? Is there a way to make sure that our teachers who do yeoman's work in this state,
they do incredible work,
that they get paid a fair wage? Keep them from going across borders. A lot of border counties in the state, a lot of other states paying them more. How do we take care of our teachers and make sure that the kids are still getting the education they need?
So I think you raise a couple excellent points. So I'm from Jefferson County, and so we're next to Loudoun County, huge delta in terms of the pay scale, and people flee the border counties to get to places where they get paid more. So I think we have to compete better. So this goes back to the original issue I talked about. We have to compete better with other states that we touch. And so I do think our teachers need to be paid more. So let me be on the record very clearly and say that. But I also think that it's important that we empower our kids, empower our parents, and that we can look for better competition, better outcomes. We tried this for 80 years. We've been at 48, 49, 50, and West Virginia has been spending a lot of money. So what I'm talking about is having a growth in terms of these opportunities for charters and for a school choice, so that people who can find the unique school system that meets for them, whether it's a public or private option, giving that additional flexibility, I think that's going to make a difference. And I think that that's going to make our school systems even more competitive as well. But look, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to this. I do think we have to always be looking out for our teachers. I got motivated because I had great teachers growing up. We all did, right? So, and I didn't grow up with all the money of the world. Like a lot of my opponents have the big names. They came from a lot of personal wealth. That's not me. I was inspired by teachers. We have to get back to that kind of activity here in West Virginia. A lot of people have the ability to be good teachers, to motivate people, and we need that to happen.
And you need money to fund all of these things. And it's nice when you have a surplus, but everyone's going to come with their hands open saying, what about me? What about me?
Right.
You mentioned possibly eliminating the state income tax. How do you make up for that shortfall when you don't have that kind of revenue coming in? We've seen it done in places like Florida, but we're not Florida. We don't have Disney World here, right? So Florida can make that up by tourism money and people staying in hotels. it's much more of a challenge in a state like West Virginia. The model here might be more like South Dakota, which also doesn't have state income tax. But how do you make that work? How do you make those numbers
I think it's a great question. But let me start with the premise that we may not be Florida. We're better than Florida in many ways, and here's why. West Virginia has the Jubilee. You go down to Raleigh County, and you think about all the Boy Scouts that get together. We have Harper's Ferry, which is a crown jewel in terms of history in our country, and there's a lot that can leverage on that. We have Blennerhassett Island. We have the coal fields that have produced so much that led the U.S. to be a dominant factor for World War II, to produce the tanks, the battleships, the steel. There's so much rich history in West Virginia, and I would argue we're the most beautiful state in the nation. So we have a lot of really cool stuff going for us.
So you're saying tourism and culture is the way
Well, I think tourism and culture is really important, but it goes beyond that. We're also sitting on the Saudi Arabia of energy. So think about this. We have Marcellus and Utica Shale. There's a huge opportunity if we can actually get the infrastructure to get the natural gas out of the ground and around West Virginia, outside of our state, and ultimately to export to Europe and other places. West Virginia can be a major force on the world stage. Right now, whether we're 4 or 5 in terms of the rankings, in terms of the largest energy producer in the country, we can build on that. And Rick, we can actually get the ancillary industries, the plastics industries, the chemical industries, if we do an Appalachian storage hub. So I think all those things are going to be critical, but I'll go one step further. In West Virginia, we currently have 65,000 open jobs. Just think about that for a minute. What if we could succeed in filling 10 to 15,000 of those jobs right away? We could have an economic boom that people haven't seen, and that's how you get to invest money back into being more competitive from a tax code perspective, to be able to address our educational needs, also to take care of infrastructure. That's really important because you have to compete in a wide variety of areas. I think there are a lot of tools available to West Virginia to really grow, and we're just beginning to see our stride.
I can hear environmental advocates already saying, basically what he just said sounds to me like drill, drill, drill. How do you do that responsibly and environmentally sound?
Well, look, I think that we always want to stand for clean air and clean water, and West Virginia's done a really good job over the last 30 or 40 years. We're talking about the technologies are in place for coal, and what's done for natural gas can be done the right way. And we want to make sure we're protecting future generations in West Virginia. So you don't have to compromise public health and safety, and yet you could still be a dominant force. And we're going to always make sure that that happens. There needs to be rigorous enforcement of the laws, but you also have to make sure that you're treating people responsibly. And I think that's what you're going to see. West Virginia is going to be America's energy state. I'm going to be America's energy governor, and West Virginia is going to grow dramatically as a result. I think that's one of the ways we're going to really make a big difference. And then that's how you best address some of the other real serious needs that we have that we've been talking about openly in this meeting.
I want to get into some social issues now. About a year ago, I think it was January of 2023, you brought up the possibility of suing over what was going on in D.C. concerning ESG scores. And, and for lack of a better way to put it, this push to maybe have these companies think more about diversifying their workforce and having 401ks in many ways wrapped up into environmental issues rather than the straight bottom line, what's going to be the best ROI, what's going to bring in the most money for my clients. I don't think that suit went anywhere, did it?
It's still pending.
It's still pending, okay. What's your take on what, there are a lot of people on each side, some saying, well, so what? Diversifying is a good thing. What's wrong with DEI? What's wrong with ESG?
I'm so happy you asked that question, because I think that the ESG movement is one of the most destructive in the country, and here's why. I'll give you a couple examples. So right now, the Biden administration, because they lost in court, the big cases that we won, West Virginia v. EPA, I led the way nationally to block the Green New Deal. Now, because they lose on that front, they're trying to have all these other federal agencies start to advance their new environmental agenda. But it's a radical agenda, this Green New Deal, and I could talk for hours about that. One of the things that we've seen is the Securities Exchange Commission. They're trying to push these ESG rules. But the SEC has nothing to do with climate. The SEC has nothing to do with energy resources. So we think it's utterly absurd to force public companies to not only provide the direct emissions from their company and indirect emissions, they want to do track and trace for every person you have a contract with. It's basically the state forcing public companies how to act. That's going to be more destructive on the private market and more destructive on a state like West Virginia that relies on our coal, on our natural gas, and our manufacturing jobs. That's what it's aggressively against. That's why I'm so passionate about ESG, because it's not designed to really address needs. It's a lot of activists who are trying to forecast into the future what you might need instead of letting the marketplace work to have a natural evolution of the energy needs of the country. I think America needs to keep advancing energy independence. We have huge threats from China coming in on the electric vehicle side, on the problems with the fentanyl that's flooding our state, and that's a separate hour we could talk about. So we need to be aggressive in pushing back on real threats as opposed to this ESG, which I think is a very dangerous movement.
We could also do an hour on the foster care system in West Virginia. And one specific issue in that system that you've gone on the record as being against is legislation that would basically guarantee foster children access to gender-affirming care. Your thoughts on that issue and where you stand on it?
I think that we have to be very sensitive as to what taxpayers pay for. I don't have a discriminatory bone in my body about people. I think we need to be open and loving. But at the same time, I don't want to have taxpayers pay for an aggressive woke agenda. And quite frankly, I think some of what you're seeing with the transgender agenda, right now we're in the process of defending the law that prohibits males from playing in women's sports. I think that the agenda sometimes goes too far. You should not force taxpayers to subsidize this. And separately, we need to make sure that there's some basic, reasonable rules in place that respect families and also give young girls an opportunity to compete in the schools and the athletic teams of their choice. I think we have to get back to those basic common sense values. That's what that was about, and I'm going to keep doing that.
You used the term woke there again. Someone must have focus grouped that to say that it plays well to a base. What's your definition of woke?
Look, I think that I don't want to have guaranteed outcome oriented results, so that when I see people trying to act to be able to advance particular groups just because they exist, whether you're talking about transgender or other sets of people, I think everyone should be subject to the same rules. The law should apply the same for everyone, regardless of political affiliation or economic status. When I see these people trying to get outcome oriented, you must do X for X group, to me, that's actually opposite the rule of law, and that's part of how I look at the woke culture.
We opened this up by giving you a chance to talk about why you thought you were the best candidate.
Yeah.
I want to circle back before we wrap this up and give you one last chance to tell people your vision of what West Virginia looks like with Patrick Morrisey as
Absolutely.
governor.
Well, first of all, I think we've got a great dog, and maybe we should keep Baby Dog. He's a lot of fun. We've had fun over the years. We do have dogs, by the way. My wife and I are married to my wife, Denise, for 16 years. I have a wonderful daughter, Julia, and I know that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to help West Virginia be that shining state in the mountains. And here's what people can expect. You're going to have someone who has been in the middle of all these big fights and has won repeatedly for our state. No one's perfect. I'm certainly not. But we are really effective of taking on big challenges and winning, leading large multi-state coalition to protect our jobs, taking on the tough fights that no one else will. They run away from it. I'm standing here today. I'm taking all the tough questions. That's what I'll do. And I'm willing to debate my opponents. Let's just get to the filing deadline and have a fair process where the media entities doesn't just set up all the rules. But what people can expect from me as governor is there's going to be an aggressive effort to drive workforce participation rates much, much higher. We're still 50th in the country. That has to change. We're going to have to drive educational attainment forward in a way that, once again, the results change. We're going to have to improve our standard of living and then stop the efforts of the media elites, the political elites, from imposing a lot of these far-left cultural values on our state. I strongly stand for the Second Amendment. I think people are going to see that a Patrick Morrisey governorship is going to be putting West Virginia first, and we're going to be a national leader because we're going to take on all the states that we touch, and we're going to have a backyard brawl in a friendly way, economically and politically, to put West Virginia on top, and we're going to win. People should look at my record. We've won on all these suits in these big coalitions, taking on the opioid epidemic, highest per capita settlements in the country, taking a Medicaid fraud control unit, right, and driving the numbers significantly positive to have additional criminal prosecutions on abuse and neglect, to make sure that we're having higher recoveries, establishing a disability fraud unit to go after the resources and to make sure that program works for those who need it most. It's going to be a fair system. It's going to be very competitive, and we're going to win. And West Virginia is going to win at a level that they haven't seen before, except in our Attorney General's office.
Patrick Morrisey, current Attorney General, running for Republican as Governor of West Virginia. We thank you for your time
Hey,
today
it's great
and
to be
answering
here.
the questions. And we thank you for joining us. And by the way, we will be offering this to every candidate. So we hope to have many, many more candidates come on here and talk about the issues that are important to you and answer the questions that people feel are important. Until then, I'm Rick Lord. Thanks for joining us today. Take care.